Diddy just had his first witness testifying against him in his trial. This witness was a security guard that was there during the hotel incident where we saw Diddy dragging Cassie Ventura. And he is the witness who also recorded this video on his cell phone and who Diddy bribed $100,000 to make this video go away. And they already played this video to the jury, so let's go ahead and get into it. The government called witness LAPD officer Israel Flores to the stand. And he was a security guard in 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel where we saw Diddy attacking Cassie. He said on March 5th of 2016 he was told about the 6th floor. There he recognized Diddy and he was wearing a gray sweatshirt. They asked what his title of his job was during the time and he said that he was the assistant director of security. They made incident reports and they also attached photos to the incident reports. They asked him, when did this incident take place? And he said 11 a.m. I got a report of a woman in distress on the 6th floor. I closed the security base and checked the camera and there was an African American man pacing back and forth and I didn't see a female and I rushed there. He said that when he arrived on the 6th floor, he saw Diddy in a towel and he saw Cassie on the floor. He said they told them that if they were arguing, they'd have to take it back to the room and that the broken vase would be charged to the room, and Cassie said that she wanted her phone and her bag. He then went on to say that Cassie said that she wanted to leave and Diddy said, "You're not leaving." He said inside the room he saw a black man wearing dark clothing. They asked him, what did Diddy do after Cassie left? And he said he called for me. He was holding a stack of money and not to tell anyone. The government said, what did you say? And he said, I said I don't want your money. The damage is going to be charged to your room. The government said, where did Cassie go? And he said, after I spoke with her, she left. A car pulled up and she left in a black SUV. The government asked, was there a driver? And he said 7 feet. He said the driver said she wants to leave. And I said, I'm talking to her, not you. And then they left. He said, we went up to Diddy's room to remind him of the hotel rules. He opens the door and grabs the phone and says, are you recording me? And I pinned him against the wall. That I took photos of the broken vase to tell them to come clean it up. I went to write the incident report. The government said, is that it? He said, my report is with my name on it. The government then asked him, did you review the video? And he said, yes. And the government proceeds to show him this video. And then they say, let's walk through it. And they ask him, who's this? And he says, Cassie. And then they say, who's this? And he says, Diddy. And they ask him, what's happening here? And he said, she picked up the wall phone. The government then said, what did you find when you got there? And he said, the broken vase. The government then asked, what is at the end of this video? And he said, me coming up the elevator. The government said, let's pull up the incident report again. He said, here, we reminded him that the checkout time was approaching. What did you add to the incident report after you reviewed the video? And he said, I described what I saw in the video. The government said, what else did you do with the video? And he said, I recorded 2 videos of it with my iPhone to show my wife at home. Then this is where they play the video that he recorded of this hotel footage of Diddy attacking Cassie for the jury. The government said, did you work the next day? And he said, no, I had the next 2 days off. The government then said, when you came back in, did you look for the video? And he said, I did. He said, when he came back, it was gone. And they asked him, did you ever see it again? And he said, yes, recently. Then the judge called for cross-examination, and this is where Diddy's lawyer, Brian Steele, starts questioning this witness. Brian Steele asks, you mentioned that you get off the elevator at 11:14 or 11:15, and you described Diddy as having a devilish expression on his face, and he said, yes, that's my opinion. Steele said, when you get off the elevator, what's in your hand? And he said, my radio. Brian Steele said, he did not attack you, Diddy, and he said, no. Brian Steele then asked, was there any law enforcement involvement? And he said, no. Videoed it for your wife and you kept it, right? And he said, I did. Brian Steele then said, but never was law enforcement called, and he said they were not. You told the jury that Diddy said to Cassie, you're not leaving, but your report did not say that, right? And he said, at that point, I did not believe it was a significant fact. I'm not going to put down the back and forth. Brian Steele then says, so it wasn't important 9 years ago, but only now, and the government objected, and the judge overruled. The security guard said, I did not put it in the report at that time. Brian Steele then said, you said you were offered a bribe, but hadn't you told him that he had to pay for the base? And he said yes. Brian Steele then says, the gentleman you say you saw in the room, you described describe to the jury things not in your report. The security guard said he didn't engage. Why didn't you ask him his name? And he said he wasn't talking to no one. Brian Steele then asked, did you tell anyone at the time? And he said no. Brian Steele then asked about the 7-foot driver. Do you know who it was? And he said, I don't know, but Cassie knew him. Brian Steele then said, you didn't put in your report that you offered to call law enforcement, but she refused. Why not? And he said, because she said no, so there was no reason to include it. You said that you put Mr. Combs against the wall. That's aggressive, isn't it? He said it could be, but I only put my forearm against his chest. Brian Steele said, but you didn't put that in your report. He said, you're asking me to have put more detail in my report. Brian Steele then asked, do you remember the layout? And he said, no, just a corner room. Brian Steele then says, was it a normal hotel room like I would have stayed in, or just one room, or did it have a big living room? And he said, I don't know. The third party, you said he was on the bed, and he said it was a pull-out. Brian Steele then asked him, you were in the hospitality business as well as security, right? And he says, yes. Brian Steele then says, Diddy, it was clear to you that he wanted to pay for the damage, right? And the government calls objection, and the judge says, ask in a different way. Brian Steele then says, it can be embarrassing for a guest, and the government calls objection again, and the judge sustained it. Brian Steele then says, one moment, nothing further, and the judge redirects. The government then says, did you typically include every detail in your report? And he says no. The government said, did he seem drunk or high? And he said no. Then they asked, when he offered you money, what did he say? And he said that he didn't want anyone to know about it, pretty much. The government then said, which way did Diddy drag Cassie? And he says, back towards the room, and the government says nothing further. And this is a big deal. Like I said, the government wants to use the video to say that Diddy was dragging her back to the freak-off that was in the room to prove trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion. So the fact that this witness just claimed that he was dragging her back to that room is a big deal. The judge then says recross. Brian Steele says there are motion sensitive cameras, so there are gaps, right? And he says yes. Brian Steele says nothing further. Then the judge calls the next witness. This witness is going to be one of the workers, and we'll get into that next. But y'all let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments.